The Heydays of the Adirondacks by Maitland C. DeSormo, published by Adirondack Yesteryears, Inc., copyright 1974. Chapter 3. The Heyday of the Hops. Within their lifetimes, many older members of the present generation of northern New Yorkers have seen several once flourishing industries eventually show unmistakable signs of dying on the vine. Some of these businesses have already passed out of existence, and others show obvious symptoms of sliding down the skidways toward economic oblivion. Among these casualties can be listed iron mining, big-scale lumbering, the large summer hotel trade, and the extremely speculative hop-growing gamble. Several years ago, there were brief flurries of seasonal activity at the Lion Mountain and Port Henry branches of the Republic Steel Company, but today, probably because of the competitive pressure applied by the vast Labrador iron discoveries, both operations have been closed down. At its Sahawas plant, the National Lead Company is just as much interested in titanium, a byproduct, as it is in iron. Except for closely controlled, well-managed, and diversified firms such as Finch Purin, the St. Regis, and the international paper companies, the Draper Holdings in St. Lawrence County, and the smaller Diamond Match Company concern, large-scale lumbering of both hard and soft woods has become practically a thing of the past. These victims of a declining economy have, of course, had their unfortunate impact on the incomes of many people who depend on such businesses for their livelihood. Understandably, at the same time, such personal financial disasters have made a very deep dent in the profits of the merchants with whom the workers traded. While most people were acutely aware of decreasing activities and the resulting lack or lag in local employment opportunities in mining, lumbering, and summer hotel businesses, the chances are that the same people know very little about hop growing, a risky sideline which provided many Franklin County farmers with all the heady gambling thrills they ever wanted during the changeful period which stretched from the 1870s to the late 1950s. Each of those years, susceptible men succumbed to the compulsive urge to stake their skill and luck against the whims of weather, insect pests, increasing competition, rising costs, and uncertain profits. Some years, when poor harvests elsewhere in this country or in the world caused hop prices to skyrocket to an all-time high of $2 a pound, some major plungers found themselves up to $50,000 or $60,000 richer. Other years, however, when frosts came early to the Adirondack foothills, almost equally heavy losses were recorded. The most spectacular failure of them all was Frederick Schroeder. Nor is it common knowledge that in 1879, 5 counties, Otsego, Oneida, Madison, Schoharie, and Franklin, produced more than 2/3 of all the hops grown in the state and half the entire United States crop for that year. Just 20 years previously, the Empire State had accounted for 7/8 of the nation's crop. Although the average world yield per acre at that time was about 800 pounds, the usual production cost about 10 cents per pound, and the normal selling price about 20 cents. These figures were subject to drastic fluctuations, which could either enrich or impoverish those individuals who took a flyer to raising the yellowish strobiles or collections of imbricated scales. Perhaps it was also no mere coincidence or happenstance that this scaly cone-like fruit, so closely related to hemp, the source of marijuana, seemed to exert a powerful influence over those who speculated in this beer-flavoring agent. Incidentally, this special flavor is imparted by a yellow resin-like substance called lipulin, which is found at the base of the bracts or scales. There were a lot of other things about hops and hop growing which I did not know when I was growing up in Boulogne during the First World War and shortly thereafter. At that time, the town was surrounded in summer by green jungles of vine-encircling poles. From the front porch of my home on Fort Covington Street, the view westward was one vast expanse of the teepee-like structures of stacked poles, and the numerous curing barns were common sights then and still to be seen even in the late 1950s in Whippleville, Chasm Falls area, and north to the Canadian border. Then, by then, Franklin County was noted for the special flavor of its hops, and added something engendered by the higher altitude and faster growing season. Therefore, the crop commanded premium prices among the buyers and thus gave the growers an advantage over downstate farmers. Besides grazing at hop yards from a comparative distance, I have a vivid, still evergreen recollections of a close-hand personal encounter with those vines, which always twist from the left to right around the tall supporting poles. In fact, on that unforgotten occasion, I found out exactly what it feels like to be hopping mad. My brother and I and our wives had gone up to Malone for a late August, early September vacation. As usual, we husbands found ourselves needing additional money to meet expenses, and rather than borrow from a bank, decided to work in hop yards. We had often heard our mother tell us how she and her sisters had always earned their spending money picking hops. Whole families in those days would go into the fields and earn enough to take in the Franklin County Fair in style, besides netting considerable additional income. She cautioned us that it was very tiring, exacting work, and also warned us to be very careful not to jiggle the box. She did not go into any great detail about just what would happen if we did. The results of such clumsiness were made very clear to us, though, soon enough. By checking the help wanted ads in the local paper, we learned that several hop growers were needed. The likeliest place, one we had seen often as we passed by, was a yard owned by a man named Marlowe, who lived in Whippleville. There we reported for work early one morning. Other people, including whole families of Indians from the St. Regis Reservation, were there also. The owner was somewhat skeptical of our ability as hop pickers, but he was working against time and nature, so he told us how to go about it. He also cautioned us about bumping the box and made it clear that we had to pick clean, no leaves, no stems. The logic behind both warnings soon became clear. We also soon found out about the boxes themselves. The exact dimensions of a standard hop box are given to a most interesting thin volume entitled Hop Culture in the United States by one E. Meeker of Puyallup, Washington Territory, and copyrighted in 1883. He was the biggest hop grower in the nation at the time. On page 19 of this book is the following description. The standard box is 5 feet 10 inches in length by 1 foot 4 inches wide at the bottom, all inside measure. On each side of the box is a fir strip 8 feet long and 1 1/4 by 4 inches wide. These side pieces serve as handles with which to carry the box. Some mathematician can have the curious honor of figuring out exactly how many of those Christmas tree-shaped fruits of the hops it takes to fill the box, but I assure all that sundry and that it takes plenty. Having been told that we would be paid $5 per box, Lee and I had sudden visions of $40 or so apiece for a couple days' work. Little did we know that we would really have to show up for a day and a half of drudgery, because if we had known, we would have plucked nary a clump. However, since we were full of high hopes for enough loot to give us, our spouses, and us a memorable evening in Montreal, we started work. We pulled our own poles in order to make 50 cents more pay, leaned them against the box, and immediately found out why we had been warned twice about jouncing the container. The reason was very evident. When placed carefully in the receptacle, there is enough airspace between each cone to give the illusion of the box being far fuller than it actually is. The joker is that whenever the seemingly insatiable box is even the least bit jostled, the contents suddenly settle down by inches before one's eyes. After several such minor accidents, punctuated by unbrotherly curses, we finally learned to be more careful. The day grew hotter, and even though we worked as fast as we could, we made surprisingly slow progress. We sweated profusely, and the chemical in the spray used on the hops stung like bees each time we touched the cones. And that had to be often. Gloves were too clumsy because the fingers had to be free in order to pick fast. In short, it was rapidly becoming plainly evident to both of us that this was anything but the world's easiest way to earn a few fast bucks. However, since we were both stubborn cusses, we kept our fingers flying as fast as possible. Every so often, the owner or his assistant would come over to look at us, look at the inside of the box, pick out some debris in the form of unsaleable leaves and stems, and caution us again to pick clean. Before the day was over, we had begun to think that we had heard that command more than a few times too often. The only comic relief which the day provided was the often repeated shout, "Gilbert! Get the hell out of that poison ivory!" Working in the row beside us were Gilbert's mother and the three sisters of varying sizes. The boy, aged about 7 or 8, was a typical heller, a dead ringer for Dennis the Menace, constantly roaming around on exploring trips. Several times they managed to get him close by, but each time he banged against the box, so he was shooed away. The brat, like an iron filling drawn to a magnet, generally found his way back to the ivy patch, and we would wait expectantly and never disappointedly for his mother to cut loose again with her hog-calling voice. Occasionally, Gilbert would call back, "Ah, go soak your head!" Several spankings finally straightened him out and temporarily subdued him. Another interlude that helped make the long day more bearable came when some people drove to the edge of the field and near to where we were working. They thought we must be old hands, so we expounded expertly, we thought, on the hop business. Before long, however, the woman realized she had seen my brother before, which she had, and our phony act was over. But not before they had taken our pictures while we posed like real hop pickers. Finally, about the middle of the long afternoon, we filled our first box. Other pickers by that time were well along with their third or fourth boxes. That annoyed the devil out of us because even though our fingers seemed ready to fall off, we just couldn't seem to make appreciable headway. At 5 o'clock, we knocked off for the day. Our second box had only a few inches of hops on the bottom. The next day, with help from the wives, we managed to chalk up another victory, a second box. The third day, my mother and our wives, out of pity for a couple of stubborn lunks, went back out with us. All 5 of us worked feverishly to fill the third box by noon. Gilbert and his mother put on their diverting act several times to liven up the proceedings. With the conquest of the third box complete, we all decided that a trip to Montreal was not worth the labor involved. Total take for 24 hours of very hard, intensive work, $15. We very nearly didn't get that because Mr. Marlowe protested loudly about the foreign matter, leaves and stems, in the boxes. However, when my brother, 210 pounds, 6'2", and I, 202 at the time, and 6 foot even, made menacing noises, he reconsidered and grudgingly paid us the hardest earned money we had ever made. Such is the saga of the hop yards. Even today, the expression "hoppin' mad" is always good for a reminiscent chuckle from other members of my family. Moreover, whenever I drive through that section of the Salmon River country, I always feel that I know just a little more than the average person does about hops and hop culture, now just another part of Franklin County's past. Nowadays, even though the U.S. is still the world's leading producer of hops, followed by England, Germany, Czechoslovakia, France, and Austria in that order, few, if any, are grown in New York State, and to the best of my knowledge, none in the Adirondack region. The Pacific Coast states of California, Oregon, and Washington are now the nation's sole producers. But while the period lasted, that precarious, fascinating, but highly speculative industry highlighted the history of Franklin County.